Hey, what's up, everybody? Today is the 24th of June, and I'm recording this podcast. I'm going to do it pretty quickly. I have a lot of stuff going on in the morning. I just want to jump in. I feel it's crazy to me how oftentimes people on the internet, especially, they profess to know something or they think that they're very intelligent, and so they just brain dump onto the internet. Whether it's most likely it's Facebook, but you see it a lot on Twitter. People making these statements that are absolutely not true. The internet has given everybody a platform in which to have an opinion. Prior to that, everybody was allowed to have an opinion, but it wasn't easily accessible. It was guys down at the pub or at the bar spewing racist, hateful things to their friends. Now they do the same thing, but not only do their friends see it, but their friends of their friends and their acquaintances, people that they work with, everything just kind of, morphs into that. I dislike when people jump onto something really tight and they think that they're right about it, and they're kind of blind to everything else, all other facts, all other research. They follow, these people are the ones that follow, really heavily into politics. They follow social justice issues. They latch onto them and they don't let go. That could be things like Black Lives Matter. That could be things like any animal rights thing, groups, the dodo, stuff like that. And I'm not saying that these are a bad thing. I'm just saying that people need to proceed with caution. I just wanted to talk for a little bit about some things that I learned this week. Just random facts that I thought were interesting. Do you remember Cecil the lion? I think it's ridiculous. An animal is given a name and suddenly it becomes more than an animal. Cecil the lion, Harambe, all sorts of these things. And there was so much outrage over Walter Palmer. Was the dentist who shot him. And people were like, this is horrible, on and on. And that's kind of where they leave their research. They're like, this was a beloved lion, all this, this is such a horrible person. Trophy hunting is horrible. And I never agreed with it. I don't really agree with trophy hunting. I think it's kind of gross that, you feel the need, you need to go and shoot an animal. But I was never on the crucify Walter Palmer wagon. I think that, he paid for something, he did it, okay. Whether you agree with it or not, just the amount of just vitriol and the hatred towards that man online, I was like, so what exactly is humanity? Is humanity treating all creatures like humans or treating humans like humans? I don't think that abusing animals is right. I think it's awful. But at some point, there has to be a distinction. In my opinion, there needs to be a distinction between animals and people. People love their dogs so much. So when the Michael Vick case came out, people hated him. People still hate him. They have a problem with him, even to this day, because of the dog fighting. And I remember in high school, Michael Vick was one of my favorite players in the NFL. And then he ended up going to my favorite team, the Eagles, which kind of just made it even better. But I remember I wrote a paper on it because I was like, look, dog fighting is terrible, yes. But what we're not talking about is the social behind it, the sociality behind it. Generally, it's minorities that dog fight. Okay, that's just the facts. Most people that are arrested for it, most people that engage in it are minority individuals. What's interesting is in a sport dominated by Caucasians, dog racing involving greyhounds, much of the same treatment goes on with those dogs. But we don't talk about it because rich white people dog race. Rich white people don't dog fight, they dog race. But, what exactly is the difference? There's this inhumane treatment of animals at some point, but we don't really discuss that. Going back to the lion, people were so upset about this lion dying and condemning trophy hunting. And this week I learned something interesting. So in Zimbabwe, where Cecil the lion was killed, they're actually looking at having to kill 200-something lions. The wildlife authorities, these people who champion for keeping these animals alive, they have to kill 200 lions because of the drop in the number of trophy hunters due to Cecil the lion's death. Because they saw the backlash from Dr. Palmer, who had paid to kill that lion. Trophy hunters are like, no way. There's no way I'm touching this. The conservancy is like where the wildlife are. They have more than 500 lions on that thing. And that's a ton of lions. If you think about it, that is a ton of lions. And it was created, that conservancy was created to support hunting, sport hunting. And so while it gives a place for these lions to live before they ultimately die, it still gives them a place to live. And now they have to just kill 200 of them because hunters don't want to go, and there's an overpopulation problem. People don't understand this, I don't think, because they live in white bread, society where we can run to the grocery store when we need our meat. We can have things delivered. We can have food delivered. There's a hunter-hunted relationship, predator-prey relationship in nature that still exists. While things like deer are great, it's a problem. People think that not hunting at all is the answer. It's not possible. Because of how things are, there's an overpopulation of deer in the United States in certain areas. They have to be hunted because they eat cash crops. Take that home, you vegan people. Like, you have these animals, you want them to survive, but in turn, if they were to survive, they would eat everything that you are trying to eat. Irony. Just kidding, I don't know. But it baffles me that you can have such a strong opinion and not know all the facts. So they have to kill 200 lions in Zimbabwe this year because there's just not enough food, there's not enough space for that many lions. You know what also is crazy to me is Zimbabwe is a very poor country. There's poor areas of your city. I've been in poor areas of the country, and they are still head and shoulders above poor Zimbabwe. So then you take out 200 lions. Do you know how much a lion hunting tag, I believe, was like $50,000? You have to pay $50,000 in order to go hunt these lions. So what happens? 50,000 times 200 lions is $10 million. You know what $10 million can do for a small community in Zimbabwe? I think that's incredibly selfish to say that us as Americans dictate the rest of the world. These are the same people that want our hands out of other countries in political recourse, in anything that has to do with government, anything that has to do with the military. And yet we're directly affecting a country because of how the people in this country turned on someone who did something like hunting. I mean, to me, that's crazy. I think that's so crazy. And you might not agree with that, but I think that there's certain things that people do that are, maybe not in line with what I believe, but if it's legal and it's benefiting something, who am I to say what's wrong and what's right in that way? I think that everybody definitely has like a moral compass that we follow. Some people don't, I guess, but those are the people who are killing other people in the name of whatever, race, religion. And it's hard for me to get behind any like one specific ideology, whether that's being a Republican or a Democrat, being Christian, being Jewish, being Muslim, being Hindu, whatever. I just think that there's so many things in the world that we need to learn. I don't think I can submit to one thing. And there's so many people that feel the opposite of this. I think that there are people who submit to the religion that they believe in 100%, and they don't always consider the other factors. You have people like the Westboro Baptist Church that, honestly, if you listen to what they're trying to say and what they're trying to do, they're trying to follow their interpretation of the Bible as they're reading it. Okay, this is whether you agree with it or not, I think it's awful to say something like God hates fags, on the sign, or God, is happy that this soldier died. Oh, that's awful. And I was listening to an interview with the granddaughter of the founder of the Westboro Baptist Church, who actually left the church a couple years ago. And one of the points that she made was that there's humanity that needs to take place. These people, you have to take in consideration the people that you're attacking. These people lost a son or a father in the war, gave their life for the country, and people are telling them that they're bad people and that God wanted that to happen. And that's such a literal translation of whatever they were reading in the Bible. In the same breath, I guess, the people condemn religion. It seems to be more and more that way. It seems to be more and more the popular consensus that religion is bogus. What I think is interesting is there is no truth that God doesn't exist. Literally no truth, no evidence that God does not exist. So to say with a surety that there is no God, that there is nothing like that, no afterlife, no such thing as religion, is as absolutely absurd and preposterous as to say that there is a God and that there is an afterlife. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like having faith in a God or in a religion is valid because it's believing in something. Okay? Believing in nothing doesn't make any sense to me. That's just contrarian, and it's not, to each their own. Like I said, to each their own. But to me, believing that something is not real and doesn't exist with an absolute surety, I don't understand it. I think that there's explanations for things that we don't know, that no one knows. There's a lot of science, I think, that we don't understand yet. I've often thought about that because, when you talk to people about atoms and molecules, do you realize, what a small level that is? And they're like, oh, we don't actually know if that is there, but we would think that We would think that that is true, right? And you're like, well, I guess we're going to take your word for it, because these particles, you can't tell where they are or how big they are, or, at the same time, or you kind of have an idea of what's going on, but not really. But we accept that, right? Because logically in our minds, it appeals to a logical part of our brain. However, everybody's different with the logical part of their brain. I think that everybody has things that they believe more strongly than other people. There's people that are more swayed to believe certain things than other people. I think there's impressionable people. What it comes down to, I think, is education. That's, I think, the basis for intelligence is your education and the amount that you know. This doesn't mean you need to be an expert on the subject. I'm talking about education as in you have read lots of things. You have an idea of what is going on in the world. You're not reading specific dialogue for one mindset, one thinking. Because you may be educated in that certain thing, but that doesn't mean you're educated. I think it's more of a well-rounded approach. That's when I think about it now, I'm like, that's honestly my hobby. Shoes aren't really a hobby for me anymore, because I honestly can't afford to do it. Can't afford to support it how I'd like. Just too many bills. Honestly, life just happens, and I'm like, I can't spend $200 every weekend on shoes that I might look at. I don't like the culture that much, so that's not as much of my hobby. I think that learning is my hobby. As nerdy as that sounds, I eat it up. I'm like, did you read that new Malcolm Gladwell book? Oh, did you see this, documentary? It's fascinating to me that there's so much in the world that I don't know. That I'm like, man, that's general knowledge for somebody. I think that everybody can continue to improve their knowledge. They can continue to have an open mind. And they can continue to make their own opinions. That's the problem with people on Facebook, is a lot of them don't have their own opinions. They parrot what they see from somebody that they consider to be smart. And there's nothing wrong with that. We look towards experts in fields for our information. However, there's people that we're friends with that we think might know more on a subject, so we latch onto what they're talking about. We take what they are saying, and it becomes our truth. And that may be fine, but I think that there's a lot more exploration that needs to happen. You'll see these people, and they argue on the internet, and they have all these facts, and they pull it up, but they're not their words. You can Google the hell out of a lot of things. You can find out just about anything you want and just regurgitate. Chew it up, spit it right back onto the internet, and say what you want to say. And that's part of what I'm saying with the education, is that when you're educated, you have a better idea of what's going on. So when you do read something, you do understand it. You're not just parroting words back to somebody else, because anybody can say things that make them sound smart, and it doesn't take much. You could be in a group of friends and you're like, well, how about Gaddafi, man? Like, what do you think of that? And, oh yeah, he's pretty awful. And it's like, you don't know a thing about Gaddafi, but you had heard his name on CNN, and so you said it. That's the kind of thing that just drives me absolutely nuts, because it's uneducated, even though it's an educated opinion. It's not their educated opinion. So I just want to make a little bit clear, I'm not a fan of Dr. Palmer, Dentist Palmer. I think he's a scumbag. But can you believe this? Like, he killed the animal. He broke the rules. He was outside of the park, and he killed it at nighttime. He's supposed to only kill it during the day in the park. And the guy had a history. He poached a bear a couple years ago, I believe. And then he managed to not get charged with this Zimbabwe thing. But honestly, technicalities get a lot of people off. And so, I think that he'll have to answer for that that awful shit that went down. But think of all the lives that are ended because of the backlash due to this one lion. I mean, it's too bad. So it's interesting to me that people have such this outrage. A while ago, I was looking to buy a dog, and so I had joined like an animal Facebook page on for Utah, and it talked a little bit about, like, I'd see all these posts about animal like abuse or things like that, and some of the comments were shocking. Quite shocking. I get it that animal abuse is disgusting. It's awful. Should never be done. But the fact that some of these people, and most of them were like conservative looking housewives or, keyboard warriors that a few pounds overweight, probably never thrown a punch in their life, are sitting there commenting about how they, what they want to do to these people that kill or hurt animals, and they're like, "Oh, I'm serious. I'd skin them. I'd gouge their eyes out." And it's like, can you stop for a second and listen to what you're saying? These are people we're talking about. You are talking about maiming and possibly murdering another person because they hurt an animal. It is such a controversial topic for me because there's so many people that think I'm a horrible person for having the standpoint. I do not believe animals are equal to people. It's not how I feel. I think that there has to be a level of intelligence that goes on with this. I don't think you should break somebody's window out if there's a dog in their car. I mean, understandably, if it's like 100 degrees or whatever, or it's pretty hot, and you think that dog's been in there for a while, that's probably a good course of action. But to just roll up on a car, see a dog, and automatically bust out the window, I'd kind of have a problem with that. That's just me. I believe everyone's entitled to their own opinion. I don't really understand why it is that people consider animals like on such a high level. I think it's mainly because we tend to associate our experiences with what we know. Not actually what is going on, but what we know in our own self. So every year you see all the Facebook posts about that festival in China, and they kill all the dogs, and people in America just don't really understand when people eat dogs, people eat cats, because those are little companion pets here in America. To say that people are barbaric or cruel because they eat animals that you think are your best friend, I understand it, and I don't agree with it. I think that there's a lot of arrogance with thinking that we're so much better as a people than other cultures And you see it a lot, honestly. And in general, it's about Asian people. I mean, because that's who does it. But all over the world, that there's some weird stuff going on. People eat some weird things. But you don't see people in Peru or whatever getting lambasted because they eat guinea pigs. They raise guinea pigs for food. It's like a delicacy in Peru. But people aren't angry about that. There's not this outrage because they're killing guinea pigs for food. Again, I don't really know why that is, why certain races tend to fall into more favor than others. I honestly couldn't tell you. I have some ideas of it, and I don't really speak them much because they're not well received, nor are they popular with anybody. But it's just personal experience, I believe. Being Asian has been kind of interesting because I didn't grow up with a lot of Asians. Being adopted, I mean, my dad is half Japanese, so my sisters are a quarter Japanese. 2 of them don't even look Asian. The other 2 don't really look Asian, they just have black hair. And so, like, they didn't face that kind of feeling. But all growing up, it seemed like it was acceptable to pick on Asian kids, to make fun of the stereotypes that you think of with Asians. I'm not going to list them because they're well known. But it was almost like there was no recourse when that happened. I'd get made fun of to my face about them. Things that, like, you would never say to a stranger who was of another culture. These were straight. I'm not talking about my friends, because my friends, there was an understanding that if there was racially made jokes, that it was just that, it was a joke, and that it was going back the other way, whether it was black, whether it was white, whether it was Asian, that was going to be something that was talked about. I'm talking about strangers who would be somewhere, like a party, and just saying things about Asians, and I was standing right there like, this is not funny to me. This isn't, I'm not laughing. Do you not see me? I'm standing here. Whereas I was in similar situations where Hispanic people, when they would walk up, that was it. That was the end of the Hispanic jokes. When there were black people that would walk up, it was the end of the black humor. The jokes ended. And I was wondering, I'm like, is this due to the fact that Asians are more of a submissive culture, more quiet, more willing to take what's dealt out, and they take it with a straight face and somewhat with honor? I mean, it's not honorable to take it, but the fact that they remain silent, it infuriates me. Like, Asian jokes get so old. The stereotypes get so old. And in general, people will always try and justify them. And they'll always try and justify everything that they say to me. And I've never understood that. I had friends that would use the term Jap loosely. I don't really understand where that came from, like where that would be considered to be okay. It's not short for Japanese, okay? It's a derogatory term. I just didn't understand, I guess, why that was socially acceptable to pick on Asians, criticize Asians for whatever reason. The backlash is never as severe when it comes to Asians. And it was interesting because earlier this year or last year, Steve Harvey made the put his foot in his mouth, talking about Asian males being less desirable dating-wise in America. And a lot of people were upset about that, but not nearly as much so as if someone else made a generalization about another culture's dating habits, dating styles, anything like that. Mainly, I didn't have as much of a problem with what he had said because he's pretty spot on a lot of the time. It hasn't been until recently where I've actually met people who were into Asian guys. I always struggled. It was almost like, well, I guess you're Asian, so whatever. I like white guys, but I guess you'll do. You're not black. You're not Mexican. And I'm like, oh, okay. A little bit of closet racism there. And I had it going the same way. They're like, well, I don't really like white guys, and you're not black and you're not Mexican. So I'm okay with that. And it's like, well, okay, I guess. It was always something that like I had to overcome, which I was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. I don't think a lot of people understand like interracial dating is not just like a walk in the park. Even today, this is 2017. It's not like people are getting lynched now. But a lot of times it's like, why are you dating an Asian guy? You know, like, you should be dating white guys, or you should be dating black guys. And it seemed like from my perspective, I didn't meet Asian girls because they didn't want to date Asian guys either. The super traditional ones, I guess, that come from more traditional families do. But a lot of them are not interested. And so I was like, well, great. Because in other cultures, there's a lot of black women that like to date black men. There's a lot of white women that like to date white men. And that's like their preferred, their preferred race. But here in Utah, that was not the case with Asians. I think that it would be different given a different culture, such as a coast, California or the East Coast. In an area where there's more Asians, I think it would be different. But overall, I faced a lot of these like racial tensions that I couldn't believe it. I was like, I'm not in any kind of position where I should feel this way. But yet here I am. The biggest thing for me is just acceptance, I guess. Whatever that definition of acceptance is, I just wanted to feel like I was accepted. And so the majority of my friends were minorities because you felt more accepted among minorities. And I think that's because they related to struggles that you may have encountered, feelings that you may have had that maybe other people hadn't. And so for me, I was always drawn more towards that. I honestly didn't have very many Asian friends. I had maybe 4. My best friend's Asian, but that, I don't know, it was never like an interaction for me. Because at the same time that I was Asian, I was very much so Caucasian. I grew up with my mom cooked. My mom didn't make Asian food. She made like white people food. She made all sorts of food. I didn't grow up in an Asian household. So I didn't relate to a lot of the legit Asians that I ran into, that I would meet. I had nothing in common with them other than we looked the same. I think that diversity and racial acceptance is a lot better, but I still think that it's far away from being perfect. And the hardest part about it is we don't really get to choose, We are what we're born with. And so sometimes, when I was younger, I had times when I was like, man, I wish I were like everybody else. I wish I didn't look like this. I wish I didn't look Asian. And I look back now and I'm like, man, that's pretty heavy stuff. Because I wasn't happy with who I was, and that wasn't going to change. I can't change my race, my nationality. And so it became accepting in myself. The idea of racism, I believe, is kind of it's become a creation of social justice warriors, the left. And I think that they kind of skew what actual racism is. If it doesn't fit into their model of racial oppression, then they dismiss it completely. And I think that's why Asian Americans kind of get left in the dust when it comes to that. Because it's interesting that, no one wants to talk about, like, the fact that Asian Americans have a harder time getting into college because they're Asian American. I had seen a quote. Don't fact check me on this, but I read it. I'd have to look for a source. That it was something like, if they allowed all students into the Ivy Leagues based on scholastic merit, the Ivy Leagues would be 60% Asian based on applications. And yet the Ivy Leagues are something around 20% Asian. So there's a prejudice right there based on race. We don't look at the qualifications. That's why I've always disagreed strongly with affirmative action. I think that we're so concerned with everybody wanting to be equal that we actually throw out the equality in things. If you base everything based on who rightfully deserves it, isn't that equal? Some would say no, but some, I don't see why not. I guess the argument would be access to having opportunities, but I don't think that needs to be factored in as much as if you went straight by merit. And so it's interesting because while we want everything to be equal, 20% Asian, 20% white, 20% black, 20% Hispanic, 20% other, that's not equal, because it's not a proportionate amount of individuals who have earned it scholastically. We don't really talk about, like, Asian American racism. It's always black, it's always Hispanic, it's always Muslim. And it's funneled through this, like, tube for, does it fit into this box or does it fit into this box? And Asian Americans, it's almost like they blend in because the left believes that racism, is success and things like that are attributed to privilege. You hear that a lot, white privilege. I believe white privilege is a thing, and some people are successful because of it. But then you have all these Asian people who are successful, and they're close enough to be close enough, to white, that it's like it must be privilege. So that takes out, like, hard work. It takes out just all these values that the Asians instill in their children to be successful. It takes that away from every race, but especially, you have a high degree of success with a lot of the Asians, and then it's just attributed to privilege because that's what's convenient and what fits in the box. One thing that I thought was really interesting, that we never talked about in high school, because we talk about like the right to vote, and we don't ever really address the fact that Asians were the last group in America who were given the right to vote. 1952, actually. My dad was born in 1953. Like, that's not that long ago if you think about it. It's really not been that long that we have that. And it just kills me because history class is a lot of, cheerleading for America. And we don't ever focus on things that America has done that, that's not a good look. I think that there was one sentence or two sentences in the history book about Japanese people in internment camps. And I've talked to people, and they believe that internment camps were just like summer camp for Asian folks. Like, get real. These were guarded by military personnel, awful living conditions. A lot of the food was rotten. They didn't eat well. They weren't allowed to leave. They weren't given privacy. So a lot of these, denial of basic human rights occurred at these camps all because of fear and the fact that, we were at war. But honestly, come on. I did a report in school about the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, RCT, and they were organized in like 1943 or something, and so the war had already started with Japan, and these guys were all Japanese Americans that wanted to fight for their country. They were allowed to. They took these guys out of internment camps. I interviewed a guy here in Salt Lake who, he's probably passed away now. It's probably been 10 years or longer since I wrote this report, and I interviewed him. And he was in his 80s. And he was part of that. And just the amount of respect and like amazing things that this regimental combat team went through was incredible. They were awarded so many awards. It was just incredible. This was like one of the most decorated battalions, I guess, in the war. I mean, just crazy numbers. Over 4,000 Purple Hearts, 29 Distinguished Service Crosses, 588 Silver Stars, and more than 4,000 Bronze Stars were awarded to these men. And when they returned home from the war, what did they return to? They didn't return to much, because when people were taken to those internment camps, a lot of times their land was just taken. And they went back, there was no house, it wasn't theirs anymore. The land was gone, it had been gobbled up by neighbors. They returned to nothing. And it took the U.S. government like 60 years to make any kind of amends, and it was a pretty pitiful amends. I mean, there's not much they could do, but the fact that it took so long and there was a lot of hard feelings. And so I kind of look at that and I'm like, that is just the way that America is shaped now. Whether we want to believe it or not, being a minority in America is tough. But the difference is how we respond to it. I don't think that there's any good that comes from having a chip on our shoulder and hatred in our hearts. All we can do is do our best to have our identity, as well as to continue to be Americans. Yes, there's white privilege. Yes, there's racism in America. But there's a lot of good things in America too. And I think that there's a lot of misguided anger with racism and everything like that. And it really is too bad that it's being defined by social justice warriors and not actually by minorities. White guilt has created a lot of things. And, I don't really know what to think of that sometimes. There's so much of that going on. So there's just some of my thoughts, I guess. I've been kind of dealing with it a little bit. I see like really negative things towards different races, and it's such a downer, but at the same time you can't let it affect you, I guess. And so it's good for me to like say these things and get it off my chest. And I think the bottom line is, the more you know, the better off you are. The more you understand the things that you know, even better off. Because you can read books and books and books and not understand it, but just know it. It won't do you any good. And so, I don't know, I think I'm going to do more podcasts where I just talk about things that I learned. Because honestly, that's all I do these days. I watch documentaries, I read books, I listen to podcasts, and I just read random things. And it's interesting to me. I am going to end the podcast. Got a long day tomorrow. And hopefully, I don't know if I will do a podcast next week. I'm going to be on the road. I'm actually headed to California. And so, I don't know if there will be a Saturday podcast. If I can figure out, I might do one from my phone. I don't know if I want to do that. I'm going to be exhausted. Or I might do one earlier in the week. Just go over a little bit about what's going on. I didn't even talk about sports tonight, which is crazy. The NBA draft was yesterday. So maybe I'll do a late draft recap. I have to read up a little bit. I honestly didn't follow it as closely. I'm glad that, the Jazz didn't kill their pick. I think that they got a pretty decent player from Louisville. But yeah, I think that I'll do a sports podcast next, so everybody that listens and hates sports can tune out next week. It'll be like Friday, probably Friday day, that I do that podcast. But yeah, hopefully everybody has a safe weekend, and thanks for listening.